Okay, Chapter 9, here's our fourth note. It says factoring monomials, page 13 and 14. Okay, so we're going to start with factoring monomials. This is going backwards from multiplying that we've done for the past 2 weeks. Factoring says to pull out the greatest common factor that usually you know is the GCF from each term, and then if the leading coefficient is negative, you got to pull it out front. So if I take the first one, this can be confusing, so watch very closely, because we've got to find all the factors that go into each one. So it's like 35. If I multiply 1 times 35, I get 35. If I multiply 5 times 7, I'm back at 35 as well. Remember, this is a multiplication that is taking place to get back to 35. Then I have x, y, and a z. I'm going to spread out my variables down below. On the middle term, I have 15 as my number. Two numbers that I multiply together would be 1 and 15, as well as 3 and 5. If I multiply those back, I will get 15. I'm going to spread my letters out below so that I can see if I have anything common. The third term I have is a 25. I do 1 times 25, that would be an answer, as well as 5 times 25. And then I do not have any variables on this one, so I leave it as it is. Now, if I look across my numbers, I want to find the greatest number they have all in common. And if I'm looking at it, I'm going to highlight that every last single one of them have 5 as their greatest common number. If I look at my letters, I do not have letters that are in all 3 sets, so there is not a greatest common letter. So if I'm going to pull out a 5, that means I need parentheses, a big set of parentheses, because I have trinomial here. I'm only looking at the highlighted row here. On the first term, I pulled out the 5, so what's left is a 7xyz. And then look at your symbol on your problem. I had a plus sign. And then on the second term, I pulled out the 5, so what's left is a 3mpq. And then on the last term, look up at your symbol. This was a minus, so make sure you write the minus sign. And then I pulled out a 5, and what was left was also a 5, and I don't have any letters. This is your answer, factored. It's a factored form. Notice we went backwards from what we were doing all last week. If I redistribute the 5 into my parentheses, I will come back at my original problem. On number 2, I'm still factoring, so I'm looking for greatest common factors. On here, I don't have any numbers at all, but I do have understood ones in front of my x, y, and my xz. If I factored out 1 and 1, which kind of seems funny, my greatest common factor is the number 1. But if I look at my letters, I have an x and a y, and on the second one I have an x and a z. So what's common is that I also have an x in both of my terms. So what I'm going to pull out is actually a greatest common multiple, or monomial for this one, because I'm going to pull out a 1x, because a 1x is in both of my terms. And then put my parentheses. What is left is a 1y. Bring your plus sign from your problem down. And then the other part is a 1z. If you don't like all the ones, you can write this as x parentheses y plus z. Either one of those would be a correct answer. If I look at number 3, I'm going to go to the factors again. 11, and notice it has a leading number there of a negative. I'm going to have 1 and 11, and that is the only numbers that go into 11, but I do have 2 x's. On 44, I have 1 and 44. I also have 2 and 22, as well as 4 and 11. Remember, that is, if I multiply those back, I get back at 44. And on this 44, I don't have any letters, so I don't have to write anything below. So if I highlight the greatest number on these particular setups, I see that I have 11 in both of my factors, or terms. I do not have a letter this time, so I don't have a greatest common monomial, I just have a greatest common factor. I'm going to pull the 11 out, then draw my parentheses. 11 is gone, but I have a 1 x squared. Bring your plus sign down. Oh, wait a minute. I almost messed up. Because up here it said if I had a leading number that was negative, I have to pull the negative out. So that means this is actually a negative 11. And if I pull a negative out front, it also changes that sign to a minus. It's one of those rules. It has to change. If you pull a negative out front, that middle term, that symbol has to change to the opposite symbol. Then if I look at my number, I pulled out the 11, I have a 4 left over. That is my answer. That one's special. Okay, number 4. I have a 4 in the front location, so that'd be a 1 times 4 or a 2 times 2, and I have an x. The middle term, I have 2y, so that'd be a 1 times 2 and have a y left over. And then the third term, I have 1 times 10 plus, or I could have 2 times 5 without any letters at all. So if I'm looking at my greatest common number, I'm going to highlight, and then the 2 is what's in all 3 terms. I do not have a letter at all. So I'm going to pull out a 2 and then have a large parenthesis. And now what's left on the first term is 2x. What's left on the second term is a 1y. And then what's left on the third term is a 5. Now my symbols, I have a plus and a minus, so that I have my answer now. Okay. Number 5, I left probably the smallest space, but it's the biggest problem for this indicated setup. I need to know the factors of 98. Well, I know 1 times 98. There is 2 times 49. And there is 7 times 14. And then I have 3 G's. I'm going to write all 3 G's out here. If I look at the factor 105, I have 1 and 105. Let me get my calculator to find these. Clear Y. Okay, so in my calculator, I'm going to do 105 divided by x, and then I'm going to go to my table, go up to 0. So I have 1 and 105, and I only want the whole number answers on the y. I have 3 and 35. I have 5 and 21. I have 7 and 15. And then I have 15 and 7, which repeats. I don't want to repeat there. So that's where I stop, and now I have 4 G's. And now I need to look for the highest number that they have in common. And I see that it has a 7, as well as, if you notice, I have a certain number of G's. So I'm looking at this as being 7 with 3 g's and 7 with 3 of my g's. This is going to be a greatest common monomial, 7g to the third. Now, what's left? On the first term, only thing I have left is a 14. On the second term, I have actually two things that were left. I have a 15 and a g. Now, the symbol in the middle, look up, it has a plus sign, I bring it down. And there's your factored monomials, or binomial. On number 6, I want to find the factors of 16. That would be 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4 with 1x. Then the factors of 40 would be 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 5. Oh, no, not 5. 4 and 10, and then 5 and 8, and then I have the letter y. So the greatest number they have in common. Oh, this one's a little different. Okay, if I'm looking at those particular terms, notice I have an 8 in both of those particular terms. And then the letters are different, so the greatest common factor is just the number 8. So if I'm looking at it, I have a 2 with an x, and on the second term I have a 5 with a y. And then look up at your symbol, bring it down, and there is your factored form. Okay, number 7 is a lot like number 5. If I look at the factors of 6, it would be 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and then I have 2 x's. On 30, there's several on 30. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, as well as 5 and 6, and then I have 3 x's on this term. The greatest number happens to be the 5 and the 6 with the 1 and the 6, and then also I have 2 x's on each setup. I have common x's. So I'm going to take the 6 with 2 x's out. I'm pulling that out front. So that'll be 6x squared, and now I need my parentheses. On the first term, if I pulled out a 6 and the 2 x's, the only thing left is a 1. On the second term, I pulled out a 6 and 2 of the x's. What's left is a 5 as well as an x. And now look up at your problem, have a plus sign, bring it down and circle. You have your answer. Okay, on page 14 I have 3 practice problems. I want you to pause and work these problems and then start it again to see if you have the right answers. If I look at the first problem here, I would factor this into its factors. I believe are 1 and 10 and 2 and 5, and then I have 2 x's. On the 24, be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, as well as 4 and 6 for these terms, and then I have 2 y's. If I'm looking for the greatest common number, it appears to be, looks like the 2 is in both of my columns for this particular problem. So, if I'm saying the 2 is my greatest common factor, I don't have any letters because they're different. That means I'm going to have a 2 with the parentheses. What's left is a 5x squared, and what's left on this one is the 12 with also y squared. Bring down your minus sign from your problem and circle your answer. On number 2, the 4k squared splits into 1 and 4 as well as 2 and 2 with 2k's. The 8 is a 1 and 8, and then a 2 and 4 with only one k. If I highlight, I notice I have k's, as well as, oops, I highlighted the wrong one there. I almost just went, let me rewrite that one. 2 times 2, because I noticed just now that I actually had a 4 that was higher than the 2. So the 4 is my greatest common number, and then also I have the k. I have a k in each one of them. So I'm going to pull out my greatest common monomial will be a 4k. Well, in the first term, what's left is the 1 with a k, so I'm going to write a 1k. And on the second term, all I have is the 2 because the other two things are already gone. And then look at your symbol, it has a negative, so I'm going to put a minus sign in my problem and circle my answer. This is the factored form of that binomial. Then on number 3, factors of 3 are just 1 and 3, but I have 6 t's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then on the 8 would be 1 and 8, 2 and 4, and this one has 4 t's. So the greatest common number that they both have, if I look at it, it appears to be the first one, of course, on t, on this one, and the second one there. But also I have a bunch of t's. I have 4 t's on the second term, so that means I'm going to have 4 t's on the first term, because I have to have an equal number, and I can only take out the smallest amount. So for my greatest common monomial will be a 1 as well as the 4 t's. A 1 with all of these t's here. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 1, almost wrote squared. That'd be a 1t to the 4th, and then I have my parentheses. On your first term, I've used the 1, I've used the 4 t's. What's left is a 3t squared. And then on the second term, I've used the 1 with the 4 t's. The only thing that is left is an 8. Bring your symbol down, and there's your answer. If you got these correct, then give yourself a great big grin.